Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 on Steam Deck got some patches. It's been like 6 months since the game was tested by me on Steam Deck. It used to be marked as unsupported, now it's marked as playable, and you guys told me in the comments, so thank you for the heads up. There's a lot of games, so it's good to see. Performance wasn't enough, and I can attest to that, at least at the beginning. So now that a lot of patches came out, I think it's time to check it out again, so let's get into it. So in the options menu, the default is 800p, performance FSR, so 50% resolution, 400p, FSR as upscaling. You also have TAA, but it looks horrible, at least in my opinion, super blurry. Sharpness, you can tweak it if you want to. I recommend keeping it at 70 to 90%, but 1% for this video I think is good enough. It doesn't affect performance. Frame generation is enabled by default, and this is FSR 3 Frame Gen, so it works on Steam Deck. For the start of this video, let's start without Frame Gen to see the real frame rate, and then I'm going to talk about pros and cons of Frame Gen. Basic off. Motion blur is set to default, let's disable it, personal preference. The FPS limit was set to 30 because we're not going anywhere above 30, let's be honest here. And when it comes to the preset for the quality, everything is on the absolute lowest, so there's no ambient occlusion, no reflections. I mean, it makes sense, we're playing this game on Steam Deck, but there's new options that weren't there before. I think this is what made the biggest difference. Physics quality and background swarm size, so the amount of enemies in the background that are being rendered while you're playing the game, and then the physics. And well, class simulation was already there, but this is important because it affects the CPU performance, and that was one of the big limitations when there is lots of enemies on screen. So I'm happy they added that option. I want to thank Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. You can get cheaper games at discounted prices for PC, PlayStation, Xbox, Nintendo Switch. So we got Kingdom Come Deliverance 2 for $62 with all the DLC. Final Fantasy VII Rebirth for $40, and we also have the game we're playing today, Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2 for Steam for $39.85 US on the standard edition. So follow the affiliate link in the description to get cheaper games, and you're also supporting the channel at the same time. And due to this partnership with Instant Gaming, we're giving away a free game each month to one of you guys, so follow also the link in the description to get into this giveaway for a game of your choice. So if you win, you can choose any game from Instant Gaming. You can increase your chances of winning by following Instant Gaming in social media, so make sure to go to the link in the description. Thanks again to Instant Gaming for sponsoring this video. Let's continue. Alright, so welcome to Warhammer 40k Space Marine 2. So this game, I've been playing it a little bit. I really enjoyed it. It's one of my top games from last year. And I'm on purpose in a part that has a good amount of foliage and effects on screen. So as you can see, we're missing those reflections, which is fine. I mean, there has to be sacrifices for this to work on Steam Deck. Also, the anisotropic filtering is lowered. We can probably increase that a little bit. Usually it doesn't have a big impact in performance. So this big thing, let's destroy it. There it goes. But as you can see, we're way closer to 30 FPS than in my first video covering the game, and it hasn't been that long. It's been like 5 to 6 months. Developers said that they were working on helping performance on Steam Deck, so I was happy to see that they talked about that. And I forgot the mouse and keyboard controls. I think this game fits better with a controller, actually. But the main issue was when there was foliage plus a good amount of enemies on screen and effects, as you can see right there. I think the CPU heavy options that they added actually helped quite a bit, especially when it comes to swarms. Right now I'm just hitting the GPU, as you can see. We're very borderline 30 FPS. I'll show you my recommended settings in a moment. You'll also notice that it looks very pixelated, but I don't think it's a deal breaker. I mean, we're playing at 50% resolution, but again, as things get more intensive with a mix of effects and a good amount of enemies, that's when it suffers the most. This is I'm pretty sure why they put it as playable, because Frame Gen is there by default at the beginning. So this will be like, instead of 25, it would say like 50. And there will be some input lag, which is to be expected. The base frame rate will be pretty damn low. But it works better than on day one, that's for sure. Especially when, again, there's a decent amount of enemies on screen. So let me show you another level with more enemies. Alright, so now in a more, well, in a different section of the game. If you compare it with the original video, it does run better, which is good to see. The background enemy count is reduced. I think that's the biggest improvement, I would say. There's less stuff going on in the background while you do your thing, basically. But I think there's a few tweaks that we can do to make it a little bit better. So we go to the settings, video settings. The big change I would do is 1152 by 720 is still 16 by 10, so you use the entire screen. The render resolution, I'll keep it on performance personally, despite it being a very low resolution. Again, half the resolution. We need it. FSR, sharpness, I'll put it at 80%. Texture filtering on medium or high. It doesn't usually have a big hit to performance, and it helps a lot with those textures that I showed you a moment ago. And then the rest on the lowest settings, without frame gen at the beginning, but then we're going to try it out. The benefit from using 1152 by 720 is that we can control the sharpness of the image within the side menu of SteamOS. We're technically using FSR1 over FSR3 at the same time, but I think zero sharpness in this menu with the settings that I showed you would be the best quote-unquote image quality on the smaller screen, and we get a small boost to performance. But when I was looking at this on day one, it was in the mid-20s when looking at those enemies, so there's less enemies on screen there. And also the better anisotropic filtering actually helps a lot with those textures when we're looking at them at an angle. So that's definitely an improvement, but you'll see a lot of breakup to the image. Let's lock it to 30 FPS, moment where there is lots of enemies on screen. I can clearly notice that there's less than usual. I played this mission a million times on my PC. And the enemy numbers in the background are reduced quite significantly, although there's still a very good amount of enemies, at least in my opinion. All things considered, there's also NPCs, there's explosions. Again, I think this is a good place to test. As you can see, the CPU usage is much higher than when I showed you before. And well, you drop into the mid-20s when stuff like this happens. So we're still GPU limited, despite the sacrifices to resolution that we made. Now I'm going to do what you guys and the game recommends always, that is frame generation. Again, with such a low base frame rate, I'm not a fan of frame gen, unless the base frame rate is at least 40 something. So we're going to keep it like that. And we're going to basically increase the resolution a little bit. So balanced FSR with frame gen and 1152 by 720, the rest on the lowest, excepting that anisotropic filtering, which again, usually not a big hit to performance. Then the GPU, we're going to cap it to a higher number. So let's keep it at 1300 maybe. Yeah, 1300. So the frame generation works correctly according to you guys. In my opinion, we should let it do its thing, but let's give it a shot. And there you go. Now we got 50s, 40s. I do not recommend you lock the frame rate. Otherwise, the frame gen just seems to be working incorrectly. I tried it multiple times. And as you can see, it looks way smoother, but I can immediately notice the input lag. So yeah, the input lag is noticeable. I mean, if you look at the frame rate, we're in the mid-40s, which would be like 24 FPS per base. And I can really notice the input lag. So let me show you what it looks like at this resolution on the smaller screen, and I'll mention more stuff about frame gen. Okay, we're now in the smaller screen with frame generation, and you'll see more of my hands in this video. That's because I want you guys to see more of the input lag, how long it takes when I press a key for the game to respond. And as you can probably notice, it's not so bad. Again, the base frame rate is into the 20s when we're using Frame Gen, which doesn't make it amazing, but this is one of the few games where frame generation ain't that bad. I was expecting actually much worse when it comes to input latency. I mean, don't get me wrong, the input lag is still pretty noticeable to me, but I think most people won't really notice it. I think that's due to the fact that we're using a controller. That gives us more leeway when it comes to inputs. And then, at the same time, yeah, the base frame rates, I don't know how they do it, but the base frame rate being in the 20s in heavy moments like this, and still being able to play the game, doesn't require that much precision, let's be honest here. It makes it work. I understand why they made it as marked as playable. If you're not playing though without Frame Gen, if you're not a person that likes Frame Gen, like myself, because of the extra input lag, then you're probably not going to enjoy this on Steam Deck, so keep that in mind. Again, this is not a real 40 FPS, this is internally 20 and there's input lag. And now as a final test, let me just let the GPU do the clock that it wants. And well, right now I'd say we're more CPU limited than anything else, but that's because we're now able to actually reduce the amount of enemies in the background while we're playing the game. That's a neat option they added in the menu. Hence why we're able to stay into the 20 something FPS range, even when there's a good amount of enemies and effects on the screen. So good work with the updates. They also added frame generation. This wasn't here on day one. We're in the jungle now, which again, much more GPU intensive. As you can see now, the CPU, in comparison to the previous part, is chilling at 60 to 70%. So the swamps are more, again, a GPU demanding scenario. Then when there's lots of enemies, the CPU also comes into play. So would I recommend this game on Steam Deck? I mean, in comparison to day one, it's in a much better state. We got more options in the menu that affect CPU performance, which is a good indication. But at the same time, we're still struggling to hit 30 FPS even with upscaling on the performance option. So that's kind of a shame, honestly. But I mean, there has to be sacrifices when you're playing in handheld. So we're usually with performance FSR with the lowest settings. We're basically between 20 and 35 FPS, depending on what's going on screen. When there's a lot of enemies, it drops into the 20s. But now there is a frame generation option, and personally, despite the input lag, I think it makes it way more playable. Again, I'm not a guy that likes the frame generation options like at all because the extra input lag, but here you don't have much of a choice. It's either that or the game drops into the 20s and good luck, basically. So technically we're playing at 20 FPS, but the UI isn't as broken as other games. The UI looks fine. There's sometimes some drops and the UI kinda stutters around. But in this game it's pretty minor, honestly. When it comes to inputs, it feels okay, but I can, again, feel the input lag. If you're okay with that, with some input lag, with Frame Gen it actually works very well. Although I wasn't able to lock the frame rate manually, so you'll have to play with unlocked frame rates. In this case it means like 2 hours of battery. So yeah, I wouldn't say it's unplayable. I think the badge as playable is good enough in this case. I think it's a fair assessment, so GG for that. Definitely the frame generation is what made it past that point, plus the CPU performance improvements by just lowering the background enemies to a lower amount. So yeah, it does look smooth, but remember there will be input lag, so you can see it across this video because I show you my hands while I'm playing the game. You can see how fast it responds to my inputs. So yeah, that's about it. To sum up, it's playable. Personally, with the input lag, I wouldn't play it like this, but on the smaller screen, I think for most people, it wouldn't be a problem. If you're not a guy like me that notices the input lag right away, you should be okay. But again, there's sacrifices to be made for this game to actually be playable. So you get a pretty low resolution, plus the input lag from the frame generation. So yeah, it's all up to you at that point. But I think on the visuals, from a visual standpoint, despite the low resolution, it looks good on the smaller screen. It's just that the input lag bothers me to no end. So anyway, that's it for now. Thank you guys so much for watching this video. I hope you enjoyed it as much as I did revisiting this fantastic game on Steam Deck now. And I'll see you next time. Let me know what you think in the comments and if you would play the game like this or you still wait for more patches, which I don't know how they would fix it actually when it comes to performance. What else can they lower? That's my question. Thank you guys. See you next time.